Nick is a really interesting person. He's been in the movement for a long time. And on one hand, he's kind of I think he represents every man. And in doing so, kind of represents the hope that we all can learn enough about money so that we can demand change from our politicians. Um, on the other hand, Nick is a kind of anonymous hero. He's every man. Maybe a lot of every men representatives are. He was a vet for the Vietnam War. He's been a great dad, a great brother, great family man. He's a volunteer. He sometimes he doesn't show up at conference meetings because he's out protesting, and nobody knows these things, right? And there's so many people like that, anonymous heroes. Um, he's written three books, and I've read them all. And I think one thing that is a benefit to having an everyman write the book is that he communicates in ordinary terms. Uh, and a lot of the information he provides is also very enticing. It's not academic stuff, it's real world situations that we all need to know and the kinds of things that will intrigue us, capture us, hook us. Uh, so he's also become a very good writer. I think he writes clearly, and I quite enjoyed his books. He has good ideas um, on how to persuade people that we've got a big problem. Nick started out just like the rest of us, thinking that all our money was notes, and all those notes were in the bank vaults, and it was all produced by governments or central banks, and he learned differently. And he's been writing about that ever since. The last thing I'll say about Nick is that um, he after getting to know Zarlinga, he was kind of trying to understand everything. And what really made the penny drop was when he realized that the various versions of the Need Act that Zarlinga developed, what was to become the Need Act, was really a social justice document. And just like FDR's Bill of Economic Rights, just like Martin Luther King's freedom budget, it was about making sure everybody had um, a fair start in life. Everybody had opportunity to have a living wage job, housing, healthcare, infrastructure, affordable housing, of course, um, and a social safety net. And that once he understood how important the Need Act was, it wasn't just about making sure the money was sovereign. It was making sure that what we did with that money was going to benefit everybody. So what's he holding up there? Law,
Love
science, and
science.
money?
Mm.
Are you ready, Nick?
Yes, I am.
Take it away.
Uh, Thank you so much, Joe, for all the kind words. I want to share my screen. So, and I guess we're ready to go.
Yep.
Well, I
Just
want to thank my friend Joe Polito for the kind words, and also Stephen for the kind words that he said about me. And here Joe he knows how to get to the heart of something or other because he's talking about social justice. And I knew Stephen Zarlinga for a couple of years. I hadn't read his book, and I hadn't go down. This is not my presentation, but I think everybody needs to hear it. And I hadn't gone to any of the monetary reform conferences. And he said, "Well, Nick, how come you haven't come to the conferences? How come you haven't read my book?" And I says, "Well, I'm not an economist. And the conferences are for economists, and certainly a book like that must be for economists." And he said, "No." So I got the book, and he gave me a free pass to that first conference, but I kind of made up for that since, I hope. Uh, and I went to the conference, but when I had to read the book first, he told me. So I read the book and I got into a couple chapters or so, and I called him up and I said, "Stephen, why didn't you tell me that this was a book about social justice?" And that's exactly what monetary reform is. social justice, how most of us think our money system works. Best way to explain monetary reform is to start with a basic understanding of our money system. And most of us, before we got involved in monetary reform, think that our federal government creates our money, banks loan us money that has been created by our federal government, and the Federal Reserve banks belong to our federal government. We think the above is true because intuitively it seems to make the most sense that this is basically how our money system should work. None of it's true. Our federal government only creates a tiny sliver of what we use for money. Banks create our money out of thin air when they loan it to us, charging us considerable interest for their privilege to do so. The 12 Federal Reserve banks, they're 100% owned by the private banks in their respective districts. These private bank owners of Federal Reserve stock are required to own this stock to participate in the Federal Reserve System. They are paid a maximum 6% annual dividend. All profits made by the Federal Reserve System after the stock dividends and all other expenses are paid is sent to the U.S. Treasury. So we get something out of it. But the private banks are able to keep all the profits they make from this creation of our nation's money. Monetary reform changes us from our present system of money into a system of publicly created money. While this may seem like a very complicated and difficult thing to do, the NEED Act, which was legislation put into Congress by Dennis Kucinich and John Conyers in 2011, would do just that. It would, number one, publicly create our money at the federal level, stop bank creation of money, and slim down the Federal Reserve System and put it into our government. And this can all be done seamlessly overnight. Now, when I started to write a book, it was going to be one book, People, Planet, and the Power of Money Project. Well, I had the added project onto it because when I got finished with it, I found out I had 3 books. Fortunately, I had a great developmental editor, Morgan Day, and she broke the big book down into what ended up being the 3 books here: Money Creation 101, History of Money 101, Spaceship Earth 101. And they've come out over the last 3 years. 101 being the common denominator in the titles, and it refers to the one economics course I took in college, Econ 101. When we came to the chapter on the Federal Reserve System, our instructor told us that we would skip the chapter because only a handful of people in the entire country are capable of understanding how our money is created within the Federal Reserve System. That doesn't sound so good, does it? For my first book, Money Creation 101, we talk about the Chicago Plan. The Chicago Plan was ignored. From the depths of the Great Depression in the 1930s, a plan had been proposed to change our nation's money from bank-created debt money to a system of publicly created money, as called for in our Constitution. The Chicago Plan began. This is from the depths of the Depression, they wrote this. The great task confronting us today is that of making our American system, which we call democracy, work. No one can doubt that it is threatened. However, the danger lies less in the propaganda of autocratic governments from abroad than in the existence here in America, 10 million unemployed workers, sharecroppers living barely at a subsistence level, and hundreds of thousands of idle machines. On such a soil, fascist and communist propaganda can thrive. With full employment, such propaganda would be futile. So the Chicago Plan was originally written in 1933, and it was ignored. And then it again was put in by economists in 1939. They tried to put it in to have the government take a look at it. And again, it was ignored. It was put in by 6 economists led by Paul Douglas, who became a senator, a very influential senator from Illinois for about 20 years. And they sent the Chicago Plan to the economists of the American Economic Association, university economists. And of the responding economists, university economists, 74% gave their approval, another 40% gave approval with some reservations, and only 13.5% disapproved of. So we had 86.5% of the university economists responding, approving of this Chicago plan to change us to this publicly created money. On the other hand, there were other issues involved. Franklin Delano Roosevelt in Congress also ignored it along with the Federal Reserve. Instead, they chose to apply a generous amount of lipstick to the pig being the bank-created debt money system. And that was the Glass-Steagall Act. The Glass-Steagall Act had some good reforms in it, but it didn't change the basics. The good reforms were the FDIC insurance began. At the time, it was $2,500 per person, and now it's $250,000 per person in 2025. And the other reform was the separation of commercial banks that we use for our personal business use from the investment banks, which are speculative. But again, this legislation left the power to create our nation's money supply with private banks. The Chicago plan would have decisively stopped that. And the plan for publicly created money, the NEED Act, which was put into Congress in 2011 and ignored, would have done the same thing as the Chicago plan. And if we put it into Congress today, it can do the same thing, stop the private bank creation of debt money. Why should we as ordinary citizens be interested in or concerned about monetary reform? Because we have just such a tremendous level of inequality in our society, and it's becoming more unequal. The recovery from the Great Recession amounted to a big increase in wealth in America. Wealth increased from 2008, it was at 54.6 trillion, and it was at 58.9 trillion, and it increased 10 years later to 113.5 trillion, almost a doubling in a little bit over 10 years. And that's a recovery from the Great Recession. It comes out to $166,000 for every person in the country, almost a doubling of wealth. And the once typical family of four should have seen their wealth increase by $664,000. I don't know how many people here have families of four, or typical or untypical or whatever, but for those of us who didn't get their share of this loot, remember that someone else at the top of the heap most certainly did get their share and your share too. That's inequality made possible by the bank-created debt money system. In 2019, the average net wealth for the traditional American family of four is $1,380,000, $345,000 per person. Well, that doesn't sound too bad. It seems like we're all doing okay in America, aren't we? No. The bottom half of Americans combined have a negative net worth. The bottom half of us are worth nothing. Now, there's something wrong about a society like that. And what's wrong is the way we're creating our money and who has that power to create our money. And if we change to the NEED Act, to a system of publicly created money, also called sovereign money, also called just money, we can change that equation. If I may paraphrase the Bandito leader in The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, a wonderful old film, it means the stinking rich are even richer than we thought they were. Billionaires, we've got lots of billionaires now. We've got over 800 billionaires in America. What's a billionaire? You know, who can even comprehend these figures? $1 billion equals 1,000 million dollars. So it's 1,000 millionaires put together. That's a billionaire. But the billionaires don't stop at a billion. They have hundreds of billions, some of them. There are over 15 billionaires worth more than $100 billion here. There's something wrong with that when half of the people combined have nothing. Not only have nothing, they're in debt and can't get out of it. So that's one of our problems, the inequality. Okay, we've got environmental problems all over the place, and I can't talk about in detail about them all, but I just wanted to focus on this one thing. There was a heat wave in the Pacific Northwest. Now, the Pacific Northwest is supposed to be this area where they have mild weather because it's next to the Pacific Ocean. But in 2021, June 26 through 28, Portland, Oregon, and Seattle, Washington experienced this heat wave. The average temperature in Portland is 74 to 81 degrees, average high temperature in June and July. In Seattle, it's 70 to 76 degrees in June and July. And during this 3-day heat wave in 2021, Portland experienced temperatures of 116 degrees for a high, and Seattle had 108 degrees for a high. 35 to 42, 32 to 38 degrees above their normal. And if that's the harbinger of things to come, we need to immediately do whatever is necessary to stop climate change in its tracks and not listen to somebody who says, well, we can't afford to do it because we have to borrow the money and we can't go into debt to borrow the money. It was even worse in Canada. Can you believe it? The town of Lytton, it's a little tiny town in British Columbia, Lytton, British Columbia. On the first day of the heat wave, 116 degrees, the warmest temperature ever recorded in Canada. And it broke the record the next day. Temperature of 118 degrees, and the following day, 121 degrees. That's out of the Mojave Desert or something to get those kind of figures. And that was in Canada. These were all in the different books. I mean, most of this stuff. Billion-dollar weather and climate disasters. And one of the things about this is I had to go to NOAA, National Oceanic Atmospheric Administrations. That's hard to say and hard to remember. And for a lot of my research while I was writing, and of course NOAA got hit. They've got a place in Asheville, North Carolina, that got hit with the after effects of that hurricane. I believe it was earlier this year, and all of these records were no longer able to access it because the building was hit by the hurricane. And then with the Trump administration, who we can pick on too, especially pick on them, they're just doing away with all this. They're trying to do away with all the research and all the scientists and everything that provided for us. But anyway, there are what's called billion-dollar weather disaster and climate disasters, which our government has chartered since 1980, I think. Anyway, the first 4 years in 1980, there was one single disaster each year that was a billion-dollar weather and climate disaster. Let's go up to 2022. There were 16 in 2022. So we went from one a year to 16, and then 23 to 28, and 24 to 27. And when I say a billion-dollar weather disaster, that's just the bottom. Some of these disasters, like some of the big hurricanes, are over 100 billion. So regrettably, the Trump administration has its head in the sand on climate change. It's all covered in Spaceship Earth, but and I mentioned about that 2024 figure. That wasn't in Spaceship Earth because we didn't have the figures when we went to press. Trump doesn't believe in the concept of truth, history, or science if it in any way is contrary to his worldview that Donald Trump is the center of the universe. He's now actively getting rid of all government agencies and scientists within them that have provided such vital information to the public about these disasters. Some of the scientists are fighting back, and they're relaunching a new, it was just yesterday or the day before that this started, I guess, website independent of government, climate.us. And when I went on yesterday or whatever, I wasn't able to access it, but they're working on it anyway. And the one behind it is Rebecca Lindsay, former manager of the Trump terminated climate.gov website. So she was one of the ones that Trump fired. So bravo to the resistance to Trump's abysmal policies, whether it's in the streets or from climate scientists like Ms. Lindsay. Why do we need to move forward on monetary reform? Because the Earth's warming, due in large part to our dependence on fossil fuel industry. Too much power in our present financial system. Because our oceans, species, ecosystems are all dying. Because we as a society become addicted to plastic. There's a whole chapter in Spaceship Earth and plastic. And I wrote that original chapter in 2020, long before a lot of this stuff is coming out that we know of. But plastic is largely toxic, indigestible by our Mother Earth. It's basically made from fossil fuels, almost all of it. Could be made differently. And read the chapter and you can find out about that. So much so that tiny plastic particles right now are in every water system on Earth and every organ of our bodies. All the while, the present Trump government and our present financial system turns a blind eye to our plastic problem. A thread running through these very real crises is we don't have enough money so that all of our people can live a decent life. Not enough money to transition to clean energy. Not enough money to save our ocean species ecosystem. Who cares if they die off? We don't have enough money to clean up our plastic pollution, even in our own bodies when we find out we have it. Within the bank-created debt money system, the fossil fuel industry is too powerful to stop using dangerous fossil fuels for energy and plastic. A solution is desperately needed. Publicly creating our money is that solution. What is the most necessary thing we all need to survive in society? There it is, money. Spaceship Earth 101 shows that the level of liberty, equality, and democracy in our country is directly influenced by what type of money system we have and our understanding as citizens of how that money system functions. It's important for us to know this because they don't want us to know it. People that have the power to create our money do not want us to know anything about it. The books were originally written in 2020 to be read in the order they were printed, but I now believe that for most people, if you're going to pick one book to start with, I would suggest Spaceship Earth because it provides hope for the future and it provides solution. And then you may want to go back and look and I want to read more about that history and I want to read more about exactly how they're withholding it from us in Money Creation 101. Money Creation 101 explains in detail how our money is basically created out of thin air by private banks when they make loans to us. It also talks about the economics profession, dominated by the Federal Reserve, reluctant to tell us this. I interviewed 2 university economists at top-rated programs. They couldn't tell me how our money is created, correctly tell me. Federal Reserve macro economist, and I suspect he knew the truth. He was very polite, but he couldn't tell me because he would have gotten in trouble. Mayday for money. Many of you on this call were at Mayday for money. So in May of 2024, led by the Alliance for Just Money, American Monetary Institute and other organizations, activists for monetary reform gathered in Chicago to make a proposal for a just, sovereign system of publicly created money to officials at the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. Weeks in advance, we asked for a short meeting with the Fed Reserve officials to present material in support of publicly created money. We were turned down. We then asked to meet and present our material with staff. Again, we were turned down. We went to the Chicago Federal Reserve in person and were not allowed to give our materials to anyone or enter the building. We mailed the material to them, and as of yet, at least I haven't heard of any response from them. Yet in 2014, 10 years earlier, the Bank of England shook the foundation of the bank-created debt money system by finally admitting the truth. This is from their paper, 2014 paper, Money Creation in the Modern Economy. The majority of money in the modern economy is created by commercial banks making loans. Just what we said, isn't it? Most money takes the form of bank deposits, but how those bank deposits are created is often misunderstood. The principal way is through commercial banks making loans. Whenever a bank makes a loan, it simultaneously creates a matching deposit in the borrower's bank account, thereby creating new money. And this is from the Bank of England. The Bank of England is created 1694, I believe. And the Bank of England, that's their central bank, and it's what the Federal Reserve was modeled after to give us a bank like the Bank of England at the time. Why is the Federal Reserve unable to answer our questions? One can only surmise that the entire Federal Reserve System was created to enable and prop up the bank-created debt money system. No matter how many booms and busts periodically take place within the bank-created debt money system, the Federal Reserve is not interested in its hundreds of macro economists taking an academic look at an alternative system of publicly created money. But if we want to understand money, we should go to the first money systems. And we got a wonderful presentation on first money systems. That earlier this year? Yeah, it was earlier this year. And then Dr. Michael Hudson was with us a couple of days ago too, to expand on that. Both History of Money 101 and Spaceship Earth 101 report that the first money systems were accounting systems of agricultural products, such as seeds and grain, regulated by the temple societies in the Fertile Crescent, early Bronze Age, 3000 to 2000 BC. Why is it important who created the first systems of money? Because the justification for our present system of bank-created debt money traces back to Adam Smith's book, 1776, his book, The Wealth of Nations. Mr. Smith described the first money systems to be privately created as an extension of ancient societies using the barter system of trading goods with each other, which he said preceded it. This justification for our present bank-created debt money system, that's the justification, Wealth of Nations, barter. Yet Mr. Smith was dead wrong, and there were no ancient barter societies. They didn't exist. It was just made up out of thin air in his head. Anthropologists such as David Graeber in his book Debt, the First 5,000 Years have not been able to find a single example of barter being used in any ancient society. So we look at what type of money system we should have today. It's important to remember that the first money systems were public, created by the state. Fiat money. We've all heard that term. What is it? You've probably heard the term and probably heard it as a pejorative, inferring that there was something inherently wrong with fiat money. Let's let AI describe fiat money. In a financial context, fiat describes a currency that is government issued and is not backed by a physical commodity such as gold or silver. Its value is based entirely on the public's confidence and trust in the government that issues it. I'll give you a translation for that. Fiat money is an extension of the rule of law. And there's nothing wrong with abiding by the rule of law, ladies and gentlemen, how we hold our society together. We'll get into that a little more too later. American monetary history. Both History of Money and Spaceship Earth tell our ignored story of publicly created money. The American colonies, we were denied a money system by Mother England. We were expected to function as colonial society without a system of money, send whatever English money made its way over here back to the mother country. American colonies had tried all sorts of things to use for money. From Native American wampum, that was used in every colony as the money for years, to all matters of fruits and vegetables. You went about trade somebody for a bushel of apples and you don't know if it's going to come back rotten or not, both fresh and rotten, to tobacco and dried fish. Anyway, they used everything, but nothing really worked out real well for them. Finally, in 1690, Massachusetts issued 7,000 pounds in paper fiat bills of credit, they were called, which were referred to as the first public paper money issued in the history of Western civilization by the Colonial Currency Project at Notre Dame University. And I wanted to emphasize that Notre Dame University because I'm a Notre Dame University football fan. And that's important to me. Anyway, and it's a distinguished university, and their colonial currency program is a real big deal too. And that's their statement. Pennsylvania followed suit in 1723 with an original issue of 15,000 pounds of paper fiat money. Eventually, all 13 colonies were issuing paper fiat money referred to as colonial script, and they were all prospering. They were building infrastructure with it. Everything was good But Mother England kept trying to swat them down when those are illegal. Those are illegal. You got to take those out of circulation. So it was a back and forth fight. And the one thing that was because we were using sailing ships to go back and forth, we were able to use them a little bit more because they couldn't stop them immediately. But that was colonial America. And then to fight the Revolutionary War, fiat paper continental currency created by the Continental Congress was used to fight the revolution, taking us to within 5 months of victory at Yorktown. Monetary historian Alexander Del Mar called the continental currency the revolution itself, fiat paper money. Fiat paper greenbacks were created by Congress and President Lincoln. They were used to fight and defeat the Confederacy, save the Union, and free the enslaved people. Doesn't sound like there's anything wrong with fiat money. So we have publicly created money, and we have money as a commodity. Okay. We had used these wonderful fiat publicly created systems of money because England denied us the use of what our founders thought was the only true money: gold, coins of gold or silver. Money is a commodity, derived its value from its physical value as a precious commodity. Whereas publicly created money, we advocate, derives its value from the rule of law in a society that assigns that fiat value upon it, the value being given by the state, represented in a different number on the paper bill or blips on our computer screen, standing in sharp contrast to the precious metal systems of money that obtained their value from the scarcity of the precious metal that historically has been largely obtained through slave labor. That's what the basis for those gold and silver coins was. It was all built on slave labor, mining that gold and silver for the people that enslaved them. How does the Federal Reserve explain money creation? Well, the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago put out a pamphlet called Modern Money Mechanics, and they put it out for 33 years. Who creates our money? I'm going to skip that chapter there, but it's talking about this is the way it is now. It started with goldsmiths. As early bankers, they initially provided safekeeping services, making a profit from vault storage fees for gold and coins deposited with it. People would redeem their deposit receipts whenever they needed gold or coins to purchase something. Physically take the gold or coins to the seller, who in turn would deposit them for safekeeping, often with the same banker. Everyone soon found it was a lot easier simply to use the deposit receipts directly as a means of payment and keep the gold and silver with the banker. These receipts, which became known as notes, were acceptable as money since whoever held them could go to the banker and exchange them for metallic money. Then the bankers discovered that they could make loans merely by giving the promises to pay or banknotes to borrowers. In this way, banks began to create money. More notes could be issued than the gold and coin on hand because only a portion of the notes outstanding would be presented for payment at any one time. Enough metallic money had to be kept in hand, of course, to redeem whatever volume of notes was presented for payment. Transaction deposits at the banks now are the modern counterpart of banknotes. It was a small step from printing notes to making book entries crediting deposits of borrowers, which the borrowers in turn could spend by writing checks, thereby printing their own money. So that's how they did it. This was the Federal Reserve's explanation and justification for what's called fractional reserve lending, a fraudulent, dysfunctional money system if there ever was one. It was fraudulent then because the people involved were not told there was not enough gold to back up the banknotes that had been created out of thin air when they were loaned or issued to them. It continues to be fraudulent today because they refuse to tell us that banks now create our money out of thin air when they loan into it, charge us interest. It's dysfunctional because the people and their government must always be in debt or there will be no money. That's our system. We're either in debt or we have no money and no society, no jobs, nothing functions in society. The Federal Reserve states, they state this now, the Federal Reserve was created by Congress to provide the nation with a safer, more flexible, and more stable monetary and financial system. Instead, what the Federal Reserve does is take the described above fractional reserve aspect of the system and keep it hidden out of sight entirely within the Federal Reserve banks, which are owned by the private bank. Keeping fractional reserve lending offstage, behind the scene, at the Federal Reserve enables banks to create debt money, also known as credit, out of thin air when we take out loans. But we don't know this and are kept blissfully unaware of what the hell is going on. How our money is actually created, we refer to Richard A. Warner, University of Winchester, England is where he's teaching now, I guess. The Lost Century in Economics, Three Theories of Banking and Conclusive Evidence. And this was done in 2014, these tests that he did. But first, he presents the three theories of banking and money creation. Financial intermediation theory of banking says that banks collect deposits and lend these out. It doesn't tell us how they make money or anything. We have to figure that out on our own, I guess. But that what it says is that the banks do not create money. That's what it does say. The older fractional reserve theory of banking says that each bank, they don't have the power to create money, but the banking system collectively, if they're all doing it together, they have the power. And they call that multiple deposit expansion and the money multiplier, the interchangeable terms. And then the credit creation theory of banking, predominant a century ago, so before the Federal Reserve, people actually knew this was how banks were creating money, argues that each individual bank creates credit and money newly when granted a loan. They create money out of thin air. After a long explanation of each theory, in which prominent economists sided with each, Warner provides his empirical proof of how our money is created. And basically, bank bookkeeping has two sides that must always remain equal in balance. So you have the asset column and the liability column, and they must remain equal. So there is a test they put in here, and it's convoluted for me to explain it. I'm not going to explain it today. You can call me later or whatever. And I'll explain it, but it's right here, and you're going to have access to this. To this paper, everybody here will have access to this. So basically, what this test proved, and they had to do the test twice. They had to do it with a bank and examiner later after the close of business because people complained that there was other business going on, and maybe that's where the money came from. Anyway, it proved that the credit creation theory was how they created the money. Now, I just did a Google search with Warner's paper title in it and Federal Reserve in it to see what the Federal Reserve economists said about this. And AI provided me with the Federal Reserve's stance. The Federal Reserve's official stance on money and its creation is not publicly detailed in relation to Warner's specific paper, meaning that all of those hundreds and hundreds of economists employed by the Federal Reserve did not have the time or the inclination to say, Dr. Warner, you're wrong here, or Dr. Warner, you're right, or maybe you're a little bit wrong, a little bit right. No, they ignored it. They ignored the paper, which is what they've done to everything else. The Federal Reserve shuns Dr. Warner's research and paper. And one of the claims I've made throughout my writing is that the Federal Reserve System acts to facilitate and continue the bank-created debt money system. I said it above there. The Federal Reserve System has hundreds of macroeconomists who research and write about big picture economics. Who creates our money and how it is created would seem to fit into their field of expertise. Dr. Warner's paper has been out for 10 years and they've refused to comment, pro or con. Crickets from the Fed. Likewise, the Federal Reserve economists haven't commented on Stephen Zarlinga's book, The Lost Science of Money, or the Bank of England's Money Creation and Modern Economy, or Dr. Carol Yamaguchi's extensive research and writing. And there are others too. I'm not going to go into all that now. We're under a time constraint. There's a word for this, and that word is shunning. The Federal Reserve shuns the concept of publicly created money. They will not discuss it. They shun it. That's the word. Can't just say they ignore it. They shun it. It matters not if it's exactly what we need in these perilous environmental and social times to pay for that which we all know we must be done. The Federal Reserve's main job is the continuation of the bank-created debt money system. They don't want a better system. A power discussion here. One of my friends here is an attorney, and he told me, because I said the money power is the greatest power in society, whatever. And he said, and I didn't really mean it that way. I meant it was the greatest power within all of the power, the different power that money has, is the power to create money, what we call the money power. That's the power to create money. But anyway, language is the first power that facilitated the development of human society. We wouldn't have had a society if they weren't able to create languages and talk to each other. And they followed this organizing principle with the rule of law, because first they would have customs that they would generally do and they could all agree on, and then eventually these became laws, and that was the rule of law. Exercising this rule of law, ancient societies began to use what we now call money. And the money power is the power to create money and benefit from its original creation. We want that with our government, to do that for environmental reasons and for social reasons, because half of our people don't have anything. They're worth nothing. And that's why this power belongs with the government and does not belong with private banks. If the money power belongs to the people and is used to benefit Earth and society as a whole, tremendous beneficial things can be done. If the money power is exercised by private individuals who own huge financial bank corporations, billionaire fortunes for the few, coupled with debt and inequality for the many of the result. If the money power is allowed to pump up huge amounts into our elections, as happened ever since the Citizens United Supreme Court decision opened the floodgates in 2010, how can we expect democracy to survive? Just locally, Frank Mervan is my congressman. He's on his third term. And when he ran for his second term, I did research. And basically, there was $20 million in that congressional election on both sides. And he was outspent by the Republican, but he's Democrat, but he won. But it was still a pretty close election. And he was outspent real big, but a total of $20 million. 4 years earlier, the total spending was $1 million for that, one congressional seat. So in 4 years, it went from $1 million to $20 million. And now they're redistricting that seat. They're going to redistrict that seat in Indiana. And who knows, it may be $100 million spent on this election. I really don't have any idea. But it's going to be a lot more. You can't have democracy when all this money is funneled in, because who's got all that money? The billionaires have it, and they're buying our democracy. The greatest power in our society, some might say it's democracy, our power to vote and ultimately determine, and I believe in democracy, vote and determine the course of society. A good argument can be made for democracy. Let's also consider the money power, or the power to create money. Democracy vests society's decision-making power with the people. But what good's the power to make decisions for society if the power to create the most necessary thing in society, money, is in private hands and not the people? It's absolutely necessary for democratic governance to put that power with the people. Money Power: 7 Tactics to Stay in Power. This is in all 3 books. And I just wrote this off. It took me like 15 minutes to write it while I was writing the books. It just came to me. And there's information in all of the in the books about, to back up these statements. The first line of defense used to ensure the continuation of a toxic money system is to keep the people confused and in the dark about the present system of bank created debt. They don't want us to know about it. That's why we're talking about it right now. And the democratic alternative publicly created money. So they keep us confused. Second line of defense is to tell us we're too stupid to understand it. And of course, that was what my instructor said. He probably didn't understand it either and couldn't explain it. And we're going back a few years when I was in college, believe me. Third line of defense, it was in the 60s. It wasn't in the Great Depression, though. The third line of defense is to create textbooks that lie to us. Now, I didn't get into that, but that's documented in the books, that the textbooks, they don't tell us this. Fourth line of defense is to stop teaching monetary history, even in the most prestigious economics programs. So I took the top three ranked programs, which are Harvard, Stanford, and MIT, and I went through all their listings online for all their programs in the economics department. I'm going by memory, and I did it twice. So I think the first was either in 2000 or 2001, then in 2002 or 3. Anyway, so I went through all the programs, roughly like, say, 450 programs scattered throughout the three top-ranking universities. And nowhere in the title of the courses that they offer is there a single mention of monetary history or history of money. Nowhere. I'm sure they do teach some of that, but not too much. They don't have enough of it to put into the title of a course. Anyway, the fifth line of defense is to simply ignore papers critical of the debt money system. And I was explaining that up there. Papers, books, and everything that criticize it, well, they just don't talk about it. Sixth line of defense is to control economics journals so that they will not publish papers critical of the debt money system or supportive of publicly created money. And so how do they do that? Federal Reserve economists, past and present, and those that want to be, are on the editorial boards, and they control what's printed in these economics. You're not seeing any kind of articles there like what I'm talking about here, or what Dr. Yamaguchi or Dr. Hudson talked about, or Dr. Huber, Dr. Kumov. Nothing like Zarlinga's book. Now, there's no mention of any of that stuff. And the seventh line of defense is to make it clear to up-and-coming young economists that for them to buck the debt money system is career suicide. Dr. Yamaguchi lost his job. And for a newly minted economics PhD, student debt of what, a couple 100,000 probably? And he's going to take on the largest employer of economists in the world, the Federal Reserve System, and criticize it and expect to get a job somewhere, even a teaching job somewhere? No, they can't do that. This is how they control it. Okay, here's an explanation for the bank created debt money system. If all bank loans were paid, no one would have a bank deposit. There would not be a dollar of currency or coin in circulation. Staggering thought. We're completely dependent on the commercial bank. Someone has to borrow every dollar we have in circulation, cash or credit. Anyway, it goes on. When one gets a complete grasp upon this picture, the tragic absurdity of our helpless position is almost incredible, but there it is. You know who wrote this? Robert Hempel, the credit manager at the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. And when did he write it? He didn't write it last year. He wrote it in 1938. And that's our system. What we must do, we have huge social crises because of our toxic money system. The injustice of billionaires flourishing while half of our people are worth nothing is indefensible. Combined with the inability of this toxic bank-created debt money system to pay for the environmental needs of our mother, Spaceship Earth, tells us what we must do. Change to a system of publicly created money, such as the NEED Act. Thank you all for listening.
Well, Nick, that was terrific. I told everybody to what to expect, and you exceeded the expectations. You all heard the passion, you all heard the compassion, and you also heard all of the research he's done. But it doesn't just sit there. He doesn't just write about it. Then he goes out and pounds the pavement. He's pushing for changes which logically result from what he's learned. I could use up the next. How much time we got, Steve? Can't hear you. You're muted.
6 minutes.
6 minutes. Oh, I could use about 15 just to ask
wait,
questions, but I
no,
think I better give people, I think I'll give people a chance uh, to jump in. I'll just say that Nick's style is to tell stories, to tell history, and that's the best way to reach many, many people. Kumhoff wrote a paper that was designed to convince his fellow um economists. Nick is working to convince us. And maybe the best kind of economist is a historical economist because they do the same thing. And I think we have one in the audience. I think Ronnie Phillips is here, and he, of course, wrote the Chicago Plan. So, questions? Eric from the Philippines. You got your hand up first. And I hope things are okay.
Do
I
you
know
hear
we've had a
me?
lot of problems, but yes, we have. We can, yeah.
Yes. Do you hear me?
We can.
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you, Mr. Egnatz. Congratulations. I guess you're also a great American money reformer. You have explained, which I agree 100% agreement. You explained the nucleus of the dumb problems. The problem is not money, but the core of the problem is the control of money. Uh, per se, the monopoly of credit, the lack of it, and the debt fueling of it, and unfortunately the usury attached to it. And you're very right. We should agree that all debts are ipso facto odious by the prima evidence that the money is created ex nihilo, and you know that by the private banking system. And all debts here, I say, are null and void from the very scums of the private banking system. All this commercial, foreign, and international. And we are not morally obliged to pay all debts from ex nihilo loan. So it's really a money crisis globally, all over the world. It's becoming dehumanizing and demoralizing here, even in the Philippines. According to Douglas, he said that the money power is evil and does not and never did wish to improve the money system. But we see the consequences in war and sabotage. Social friction are exactly what is desired. So, um, what we are doing here is to reorganize the money system, and that's exactly what the AMI is doing. But technically, it's our great challenge because the politicians across the parties and economists who are liar and the bankers who are greedy do not cooperate. The bankers have the unhealthy appetites for money at the hell fate of humanity. So, we are all in the brink of recession. Now, my question, can we produce, present, and gather hard evidences against the banking system and file as a criminal case before the International Criminal Court in Hague, the Netherlands, to prosecute those bankers responsible for the heinous crimes against humanity because of debt?
Um,
Can we have lawyers and legal luminaries of high caliber in the world, there in the USA and Canada, and yet with righteous and with love to humanity and to do so? This is very urgent. Are power. Your talk is powerful, but the problem is, technically speaking, legally speaking, both nationally and legally and internationally, we are really unable to do so. So
Eric,
can I
Er-
ask for your
Eric,
response?
Eric, you've
Thank you,
asked a
Eric.
question. Let me answer. Let me answer. My heart goes out to people in the third world that are suffering because of this system. And I think the hearts of all of us involved in monetary reform. My heart goes out to you from the Philippines because I've read what what's going on there and how the people have no money for their society, basically. And this system, when we talk about publicly created money, the United States needs to be the leader because we're the dominant society in the world, and we need to change our money system. But we also need to recognize the right of every country to also begin to publicly create their money. And we also need to understand and recognize the right for the fact that all of these odious third world debts, really just about all of that, has to be wiped away in some way within the banking system because they were obtained illegally, where we were forcing people that, they couldn't make their own money, but they had to use the money and borrow money. It's just crazy, and it's a little too complicated to get into when we don't have any time left. But I am 100% on your side, though. 100% on your side. That if we change our money system here, the other countries are going to have to start changing it too. And when we do that, we have to take into account how that third world debt was obtained. Basically, a lot of it was slave labor and theft of your raw materials. But we can't go into all that right now. Thank you.
So let's file a case. AMI filed the case against international bankers to the International Criminal Court. Can we do that? Can we do that?
I'm not a lawyer, but I'm 100% behind that sort of avenue to be taken by people that can do that. I can't do that, though.
I heard your question, Eric. I know one person to ask, and I will ask. And I'll give you, and I'll tell you what I found out. Okay.
Thanks for immune.
Did John have a quick oh, I think we're over. We have a 4-minute break. Thank you, Joe, for moderating, and we'll be hang on, I just want to double check that. Oh no, we got 4 more minutes. I apologize. Sorry, next question. I think it was John.
It was John Root, yeah.
Yep. John, if
anybody else?
It's John Root there. He may have left.
It won't let me unmute. Okay, now we're unmuted. The only thing I wanted to add to what he said, to what Nick said, is that every time you say that the banks issue the money out of nothing, you are totally denigrating how they actually issue the money. You give them a fungible asset that's equal in value to the principal that they just write into your account. And he said the bank has to balance its books every night. It used to be bankers' hours ended at 3 o'clock. For that reason, they needed time to do all that. So banks have never, not in 2,000 years, ever issued money out of nothing. It's always to monetize somebody's commitment to make the money valuable for the bank.
So it's your loan commitment. Good point. Nick, do you want to, you're good on that?
Well, if you knew that, right? Oh, you mean I created the money? Yeah, you created the money. Why are you paying the bank? How did they conquer you? That's tribute. That interest is tribute to the bank.
We're kind of splitting semantic hairs here a little bit, I think. And I believe I mentioned, they created as a deposit on the liability side of the bookkeeping. Now, I've taken out a mortgage on a house and 2 houses, I guess I bought in my life or whatever, and car loans and different things. So I've had bank loans, and when I take out that loan, nobody tells me, okay, you bought a house for $200,000, and we're putting this deposit in your checking account under your name, even though they didn't tell us that. That's why I say they created out of nothing. You want to say that, of course, the whole thing should be illegal. If that makes you feel better.
Well, it is illegal. It's from a common law point of view. It's there's no consideration, okay. And because there's no consideration, and common law has ruled over and over again that bank credit isn't money, they had to create the Uniform Commercial Code and get it passed in all of the states during the 70s. So, like Nick said, don't listen to me. I know too much. I mean, really, that's what happened. Who pays the lawyers who maintain the system?
Can I say something?
The banks.
I don't know if you hear me out there. I don't know how to work this thing, but I just want to say something.
Please.
Anyway, yeah, I've often taken issue with this, the idea that uh, the banks create money out of nothing. It gives them a credit they don't really deserve. What they do is document your commitment. This gentleman before me said the same thing. And I wasn't going to say anything, but then since he mentioned it, I think I would just come in and reinforce that idea, because banks do not create money out of nothing. It's what they create. What they do is document your commitment, and that's so you're generating that money. We create the money when we borrow, when we say we're going to create, and we generate this documented commitment, which is now an IOU, and now that circulates for a while anyway till the debt is paid off. Money is an unfulfilled commitment, and when it's paid off, it disappears. But without the there is no money.
Disappears into
James
the thin
Holman
air
has
it was
his hand
created
up.
out of.
Sorry, Nick.
James,
It disappears into the thin air that it was created out of.
Okay, James,
James.
a 1 minute question so we can, or a quick question.
Raise your right side up again.
Hi, everybody. So I just had a couple of quick questions that kind of come to mind as I'm hearing all of this. How you doing, Nick?
Okay.
So the first thing that comes to mind is, when we talk about publicly created money and adding additional money into the system, the first thing that I start thinking about inflationary spirals and how that would just drive an increase in the money supply without necessarily guaranteeing that it goes to anything useful. And I suppose my counterpoint to that is one of the things I didn't hear mentioned here at all is, what about just bringing back the marginal tax rates? Because it used to be that if you made over $100 million, you'd pay something like 90% in taxes, and that would be re-injected into the system and effectively function as a wealth transfer in order to undermine the worst of wild inequality. It's one of the reasons they say that the 50s and 60s were kind of a golden age in America, is because the rich just couldn't get that rich. So instead,
Thank you, James. That's a good question. And Nick, do you have a quick thought?
Yeah, I do. And I remember those and I wasn't paying taxes like that then, but I remember that from my youth. And you're right, I'm all for in increasing the taxes and actually taxing wealth too. But the systems of publicly created money in the past, people were judicious about exactly how much money they created. And what they did find is that if they were creating money for something that was beneficial to society, whether it was a physical thing like building a highway or something like that, or whether it was for human infrastructure such as education, building schools, or things like that,
Nick,
it was never inflationary. And I want to just say one more thing, I'm going to shut up. And the last thing is that James Holman was my copy editor for Spaceship Earth, and I'm so glad that he joined us. And asked me a tough question. He was asking me this stuff about, like, hey, you need to put more in there about this or more. A terrific editor, wonderful man. Thank you.
Good job, James.
Thank you, Nick.